Hi everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the process of colouring in line work in Photoshop. This video is primarily aimed at people that haven't used Photoshop before. That might be someone who has used a different type of software like GIMP or Clip Studio Paint, or it might be that this is the first time you're ever using any kind of creative graphics software. We're going to start off by taking a look at the document that we're going to be using. And just how it's been set up so that we can keep our work organized. And then we'll just take a look at the actual process for coloring in the line work. How to sample colors, how to change and select colors, and some basic brush settings and so on. So let's take a look at the actual document layout. You can see here we've got our line work that's been produced by Sean. What I've done is gone over the roughs that Sean has provided, and I've produced one set of line work that we'll be using in this video for the front view, and this was just done in Photoshop by drawing over the top. The other views we'll use in the follow-up videos showing some other processes. Up in the top right hand corner I've got my original sample that I'm going to be using for color picking, so I can match the colors of my artwork for this front view to the original, and then we'll try some different colors with the other ones in the following videos. Over here on the right hand side of the interface I've got a few panels open that I use commonly. Photoshop's interface is very modular, so you can have lots of different panels open at once, and you can also sort of set them up how you like. I tend to always have my layer panel open. That's one of the most common panels used, and I like having the navigator open as well, so I can quickly zoom in and out by hitting the buttons here. I tend not to use the slider though. Okay, so if you don't have your layer panel active anywhere, sometimes it might be hidden, so sometimes it might be hidden behind one of these other tabs. Okay, sometimes it might just be missing entirely. You can adjust things by moving them around like that, and you can dock those panels in by hovering over the edges of the existing panels. If you don't find your layer panel and your color panel open, you can come up to the window menu and you'll find all the different panels inside this menu. The ones that have ticks are the ones that are currently visible. Keep in mind that does not necessarily mean that they're not over here. It just means that if it's not ticked, it might actually be hidden behind one of the other panels. So you can see here layers is active, but channels isn't. But over here I can see the channels tab is actually sort of hidden back here. So the ticks just show you which ones are actually at the front. So just make sure you've got layers, and I would suggest having your color panel open as well, just in case. That's commonly used. And if you like zooming in quickly just by clicking on these buttons in and out, you can have your navigator open as well. Okay, so let's take a look at our layers. It's really important when you're working to keep your layers organized, and it's a good idea to name your layers as you're going. To rename a layer, you can double click on the name of the layer and then type in a new name for it. By default, the bottom layer normally when you open a new document is called background, and then each additional layer you add will be called layer and then the number in which it's created, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on. And the way that this works is the layers at the bottom will appear underneath layers above. So what we'll be doing is creating color layers to fill in parts of our design, and we'll be placing those underneath the layers that have our line work. So I'll just run you through what these layers are so you get a bit of an understanding of how I've set my document up, and then while you're working with your line work, you can kind of maybe arrange them in a similar fashion. So at the bottom, background layer, that's just this white background, and if I turn that on and off, you can see that white background disappearing. If you ever see this grey and white checkerboard pattern, that means that area of the document is blank, it's transparent, and there's nothing in there. I then got my color sample image, which is this one just here, and that's just separated on its own layer, so I can turn that on and off. You may or may not have one of these, depending on whether or not you're using maybe some reference images as a color palette. I've then got my rough sketches just here. I actually have 2 copies of these. What I like to do is keep my original copy of my rough sketches. If I turn that on, you can see it comes in a lot darker. I like to keep a copy of that just turned off, and that way if I mess something up, I've always got my original artwork that I was working from, and I can just copy a new version of that, just duplicate that layer, and then continue working if something happens to it. So above that, I've got the turnaround 50%. That's a copy of my original artwork, but what I've done is reduce the opacity down to 50%. And that was so that when I traced my line work over it, I could see my line work more than I could see the background rough line work. Okay, so that way my lines weren't getting mixed up with the rough line work underneath when I was creating my final line work. Then what I've got is my line work. So I've got my front line work here. Now this is a group. These layers with a little folder is a group, and you can create those down at the bottom here of the panel, or you can normally create them under the layer menu and go new group just here. So the group basically works like a collection of layers. So you can drag layers inside this group folder and then they'll all appear. The benefit of that when we're working with separate layers for line work and color is that I can move the group and it will move the line work plus the color layers that I'll put into here all as one object. And that way I don't have to either select multiple layers to move them all at once or move each one at a time and then misalign them. So working with groups is actually very handy. So I've got my Photoshop line work. So I've named that PS for Photoshop and then OL for outline. You can call your layers whatever you want. You might just say, you know, line. But this is going to differentiate for me the difference between my Photoshop version of my line work and my Adobe Illustrator line work, which I'll be using in upcoming videos. Now you can see you can turn the layers on and off just by clicking the little eyeball. So I can hide layers like that. If you hide a group, it hides all the layers inside the group. Or you can hide the individual layers inside the group one at a time as well. And then at the top here, I've got my 3/4 view. So you can see here what I've done is I've named the actual layer with the line work on based on what I created that line work in, so Photoshop. But then I've put that in the group for the front view. So I've called this one front. So all the color for the front and the line work for the front is going to be in there. And then the same for the 3/4 view. Eventually I will end up with a side view as well for this one. But I don't have any line work for that, so I haven't created that yet. Another thing that I like to do is I like to color code some of these folders sometimes. So often what I'll do is take my rough sketch folder and I'll right click on that folder and then come down to the bottom. And often what I'll do is actually select gray for that. We can set the color for those folders here. So I'll set that gray and you can see it colors them in gray. And then I'll do the same thing for my front and 3/4 views and eventually my side view, but I'll just give those other colors. So I might say orange. And then for this one, I might say blue. So that way, just very quickly glancing at them, I can kind of see, okay, I know that I've got this many layers are sort of associated with one another and this many are associated with this and so on. Now, if you start moving layers in and out of these groups, the layer will retain the color that you've given it. It won't automatically change to the new group color. So just bear that in mind if you start moving things around. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to color our front view in. I'm going to use my navigator to zoom in by clicking on the zoom in button up the end here. I can then drag the red square around inside the navigator window. Or what I can do is hold the space bar down onto my on my keyboard and then click and drag. Now in this video I'm going to be using a Wacom tablet for this. In following videos, I'm going to show you processes you can use with a mouse to be able to color your work in accurately and sort of a little bit more easily than trying to actually draw with a mouse. So this one's Wacom tablets. Okay, so I'm going to start off with my front view. So I'm just going to collapse down my 3/4 group. I'm not going to be working on that. And I'm going to select my front group just here. And I'm going to create a new layer. So I can do that down here by clicking this button. Or I can come up to the layer panel and select new layer. The shortcuts there, Shift-Control-N or Shift-Command-N on a Mac. Now technically I could give this a name here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with the character's face, and that's going to be orange. So what I'm going to do is call this orange fill. You can name it whatever you like. You know, just make sure that the names you're giving your layers are logical and that other people would understand them. Okay, so I've got my orange fill layer, and you can see at the moment it's above the outline layer that I've got. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that layer down underneath the outline layer, so the outline layer is now above. Okay. Now, what you can do if you like is you can lock that outline layer so that you don't accidentally draw on it or erase parts of it. Okay, that can be handy sometimes. All right, I'm going to select my orange fill, and what I need now is a color, and I need my brush tool. So I'm going to come over to the side here to the toolbox, and I'm going to select the brush tool just here. Now, the shortcut for that is B on the keyboard. Now, these little icons that have these tiny little arrows on them, if you click and hold, it will pop a little panel out and you'll find multiple tools inside there. You need to make sure we're using the brush tool and not one of these other ones. Usually by default, if you hold down Shift and hit the shortcut key, it'll cycle through these. There is a setting that allows you to disable the Shift function for that, and then you can just hit the letter, and that's what I usually do because it's quicker. But just make sure that you're on the brush tool, not the pencil tool or something else. Okay, now what we need to do is make sure that our brush is functioning okay, or that we've got a good brush setting for what we're going to do. What I want is just a basic solid color off this brush. So what we're going to do is come up to the Windows menu. There's a couple of different ways we can do this. We can go to Windows menu and select brushes just here, and that's going to pop the panel out. I've actually got these nested just here, and if we come into general brushes, we've got a few basic presets. We've got a hard brush, that's the one we're going to use, and we've got a soft round brush. Now, if you've got a tablet, like a Wacom tablet or a drawing tablet that you're using, you could use the hard round pressure size just here. And what that'll do is make the brush get bigger the harder you push down on the tablet. That's the one I'm going to use, and that's going to let me get into the smaller sections. But I'll also show you what happens with the hard round without the size adjustment. So I'm going to start off with that one. Okay, so now what I need to do is select my color. I'm going to come over here where I can see my color reference, and with the brush tool active, if I hold down the Alt key, you can see that's displaying there on the cursor. When I hold Alt down, it gives me this eyedropper, and if I click on a color on another part of the image like this, it then selects that color down here as my foreground color. So my brush will now paint orange. You can also click inside this swatch down here and then adjust the color manually if you like, using these settings here. Also, when you're in here, if you hold down Alt, you can see cancel turns to reset. So if you've been changing sort of colors and so on and you want to go back to what you had, you can just hold Alt and hit reset. Okay, so I'm now going to come across and start coloring in. I've got to make sure I'm on my fill layer. So you can see here, if I just tap gently, it's it's sort of not really giving me a full fill. So I need to kind of push down a little bit. These tablets often will have an opacity adjustment setting on them so that you can sort of brush lightly and it'll just give you a very faint color. If you haven't used one of these before. You can see there I've gone outside that line a little bit just there. I'm going to show you how to fix that in a second. So basically you just draw underneath your line work like that. You can see here, if I turn the line work layer off, you can see that the edges of the color that I've drawn in is actually very rough. That's perfectly fine, you won't see that because the line work is covering it. Now if you go outside the lines, you've got two options. If you're using a tablet that doesn't have an eraser on the stylus, on the reverse end of the stylus, or the pen, you can come over and select the erase tool just here. And the erase tool basically now will remove the color. So you can just draw over that and it'll get rid of it. The settings for your brushes to change the sizes and so on, if you come up to Window and go Brush Settings, just there, it pops this open. When you've got the erase tool active, these will adjust the eraser tool. So you can change the size of the eraser and some of the other settings, okay? You can also have like a soft edge eraser, so it kind of blurs towards the edges. I tend to leave it as a hard edge more often than not for what I'm doing. So you can change them there. You can also right click like that and you can change some of the basic settings here like the size and the hardness. You can also get into your presets there as well. The eraser settings are they're isolated from the brush settings. So if you've got one lot of settings for the eraser, they don't change the settings for the brush tool. So you can switch back and forth and have different settings for either one. Okay, now the other option, if you've got a Wacom brand tablet, you can actually just flip, instead of changing to the eraser tool, you can just flip your stylus around and it will automatically use the eraser when you're using the back end of the tablet pen or the stylus. So that just makes it a little quicker. So I'm back on my brush and I can go in, drop that color in, and then I can erase it just by flipping my pen around the other way and then removing that excess color. So all I do is go through and create a new layer for each different color that I'm using. You don't have to create a new layer for each individual piece of the picture that you're coloring. So you can have all your orange on one layer, all the green or whatever else you're using on other layers. Just keep a new layer for each different color that you're doing. So we'll leave this video here, and in further videos we'll take a look at some other techniques and options. I'll see you then.